Hello again, friend. This is Charles Pugh. I'm coming to you again today because I want to talk about something that I see. I want to talk about something that I mentioned in the positives about this coronavirus. Now, have you ever seen anything like what we are experiencing? We are experiencing something right now that has not happened in our lifetime to impact so many people around the whole world. Could you have thought of something that would be this impactful to every human being, regardless of their race or really nationality? I might talk about that in another video. I see this impacting everyone in the world, young, old, white, black, Asian, brown, whatever nationality, red and yellow, black and white, as the song said. I mean, we have every person in the world who is knowledgeable about anything going on knows that this is a danger, that this is something that is an unseen enemy. This is something that you might have that you could impact other people with. So it's a very tricky thing, but it's a very pervasive thing. It's something that is impacting the world, and it's changing the world. That's what happens when you have a tragedy, when you have a pandemic, when you have something on this magnitude and with the level of attention that it's getting around the world and the shutdowns happening everywhere. You've got an opportunity like you never have before. And that's why I said in the positive, and the last thing that we mentioned as a positive when my family talked about that this sets the ground for revival. Because, friend, we will not see revival the way we are. We won't see revival if we are proud people. We won't see revival if we think we know it all. We won't see revival if it's about us. It has to be something that changes us. And I know we don't like change. I mean, who likes change? We don't like confrontation. We don't like change. We don't like some things, but it's what we have to do. We have to change if we're going to grow. I've written blogs about this. I've written a lot of things as God has taught me. I've written a lot of things on my website that I've posted. I don't know how many people have looked at all these things, and probably not as many as might in the future. I don't know. I don't know how God will use this channel, but I pray that He'll use it to help people in this time of tragedy, because I know what tragedy's like personally. I've been through a lot, and God has taught me a lot. And I know you've been through things in your life. Many of you have been through trials, and everyone goes through that because it's a part of life. And change is a part of life. And we can't hate change. We've got to understand that we have to change if we're going to grow and mature and be better people. So I want to read for you today, or review something and talk a little more about it on my website, lessonstolearn.com. And on this website, I have an article that I wrote back in 2008 about change and revival. Now, you're getting ready to hear a whole lot more with a stimulus package that's being passed in Congress to be able to help Americans in the time that so many are out of work. You're going to hear a whole lot more about an economic revival. Well, friend, we don't just need an economic revival. We don't just need an emotional revival where we can finally get out of our house and finally have freedom again, or feel like we do when things get back to normal. We don't need to get back to normal. We need change, and we need revival. Now, the revival that I'm talking about is a spiritual revival. And if you don't know who God is, now is your chance to really think about this, really try to get in tune with what life is about, and think about your relationship with the Creator. Because, friend, we're coming up on Easter. Easter is the day when we celebrate the greatest thing that ever happened. And I will be talking about this more as we head toward that day. But the resurrection of Jesus Christ is the greatest event because death was defeated. And death is the worst enemy. And it's an enemy that's taking people's lives now. So friend, is it going to take your life? Could it take mine? Would it take our loved ones? We need to change and we need to have revival. There was a lot of emphasis by believers in Jesus Christ about revival before this past election. And there's been a major change and shift in what's happened in our country, and many people see it, and there's a movement of people that see it. But this virus is touching everyone. It's touching everyone regardless of political party, regardless of nationality, regardless of where you are in the world. It's going all over the world. And it's bringing that opportunity all over the world for change in a positive way and for revival of God's church. Because church, you believers in Jesus Christ out there, you need to be revived. You need to live revived as I seek to do every day of my life and have even more since I was tested to my core. I talk about that more in the book. I don't want to get into that now. I want to focus on what I said. That's a blog in my book, but it's the blog Change and Revival. So this was on 10/22/08. As noted in previous blogs, tragedy tends to peel away the layers of life that keep us from the most important things. We often take much for granted and even live our lives in response to the changing winds of opinion rather than being led from an inner core, as another blog I wrote on 10/13 discussed. Tragedy helps us see our inner self and be in a place to be able to make any necessary changes. Humanly speaking, this makes it more possible for what history shows us to be incredible changes in societies impacting the course of history. I am talking about revival. Now, I've read a lot of books on revival. I've done a lot of study on revival. And I mentioned that in this next paragraph. And right at this time, I had been doing a lot of research. And I say I've recently been doing some research on these patterns in the history of the world and in America. I found it interesting to see that while there are reports of revival that seem to come in cycles of about every 50 years, the last wide-reaching, impacting revival is said to have begun around 150 years ago, I guess maybe 162 or so now, on Fulton Street in New York City in 1857. This was just a few blocks from where the World Trade Center 9/11/01 attack occurred. Now, as I thought about what God was doing through that tragedy at Virginia Tech and what brought me to where I am, I can't help but think that God is going to send another revival, and he certainly has done that more with me, and he's going to do it again, I believe, and especially as more are praying more diligently for this. And back then, in 1857, it started with one man's burden to prioritize praying for this in 1857. And today, there are many all over this country and even around the world that are praying for revival. It actually helped lead to more focused midweek prayer services that had been more well attended in churches. But I said, could the Virginia Tech tragedy be a part of what God would use to send revival? And there have been many changes, I would say good and bad, that tragedy certainly impacted my life and led to what is still today more of a state of tragedy for me, because at this time I was still in the midst of a lot of trials. I am revived in my thinking and in my core, and am seeking to help others be revived as well. Maybe it will be something like what is said to have happened on a Western Kentucky campus even today. That was another shooting that had taken place. Maybe it will be some other local, national, or international tragedy. And friend, this coronavirus could indeed be the international tragedy that will bring believers to their knees, that will see this country, that will see the world come to an awakening and revival of God's church. What will it take to awaken you? What change will you pursue? Will you be revived? Will you be focused on a set of priorities that puts the spiritual first, the emotional second, and the physical last? I got to stop there for a minute. We're inside out. We've got it totally reversed. We focus on the physical in almost everything in our lives. We focus on the material in almost everything in our lives. We've got it reversed. We still have that emotional in the second, but we've got to get it right. And in the core of who we are, it has to be the spiritual first, and then the emotional follows, and then the physical after. And if you get that change right, it'll change who you are, and it'll change you so that you can be revived. But our tendency, reflected throughout the world, is to put that physical first, that emotional second, and the spiritual last. And at this time, I said the U.S. political election and discussion is a good example of this. A priority focus on the economy and the material rather than the moral and the spiritual. You might also want to reference my 998 From Reform to Revival blog. So I've written a lot of things about this because I've seen that that's the only answer. That's the only answer to the change that will be the best for everyone, that will give the most freedom for everyone, and that will most of all get us in touch with our Creator God in a greater way as the people who believe in Him and say we do, and even bring about people to want to come to know Him who don't know Him, who don't know that Jesus Christ is the God-man. He's the one who died for our sins. We are accountable to a holy God. And we cannot be in His presence with sin. So He made the way of salvation possible. He sacrificed Himself in the person of the Son, and He died on that cross, and He was buried, and He rose again. And Easter Sunday is when President Trump says that he wants to see the churches filled, and then possibly strategic areas of the country going back to work. And friend, wouldn't that be a great time to see if believers would humble themselves instead of get themselves focused on the material things, on the physical things, if we would humble ourselves and pray. You know the verse? If my people who are called by my name, as God was speaking to Israel, but principally is true for any of His people, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven. Then will I forgive their sin, and then will I heal their land. If the churches would gather to pray like we've never prayed, the virus would die. Because we could, in faith, believe that God can do it. And I believe He can do it again. And there's no last days theology that says He couldn't. He's done it before. He can do it again. And I trust Him to do it. And I trust, friend, that you will let this coronavirus change you. That you will let it put a change to your very core. That you will let it change you to prioritize the spiritual, what God says in His Word, that it will then flow to your emotions, and then it will flow into the physical, and you'll be a better person, you'll be a better worker, you'll be a better person to your family, you'll be a better husband, a better wife, you'll be a better parent, you'll be a better child, you'll be a better person overall that can help other people to see that God is living in you and that they need to know Him too. So, I said in conclusion here, if we focus on fearing the loss of the material, we will be emotionally unstable and all out of order. Just look at the current stock market volatility around the world. It was happening then too, not to the degree as it is today. But if we focus on fearing the Lord, then our emotions will properly follow, eventually leading to physical blessings. Will it take additional tragedies to get your attention? Will it take more national tragedy for our country to properly change? Will it take a personal tragedy to get your own life in order? We should prioritize praying so we can prioritize living. The change we need is revival. Friend, would you be revived? Please subscribe to this channel so you can see what God is teaching me. Look at what's below. If you have comments, comment to me below. Do you believe we can see revival? Do you see how this has changed you? Comment, tell me, show me what God is teaching you. Let's share what God is doing in our lives through this so that we can be a blessing to other people, so we can see God work in our lives and work in our neighborhoods and work in our counties and cities and country and the world. Check out all of what I'm posting on this channel. Subscribe to it. Go to the box, comment. And I thank you for listening. Thank you for taking the time to do this. Because I want to see revival. I want you to share this channel with other people. I want you to share this truth and this burden God has put on me, and He's had on me for a long time, since my own personal tragedy that I write about in my book. So share this with people. Share so you get the notification when I post something again. When a new video comes out, I don't know how much I'll be posting. I'm not sure, but I've got a lot to say because I've learned a lot. And I want you to learn too, friend. So change and be revived.